Okay, fantastic. Welcome everyone to the Amadeus webinar. I'm going to hand you over to Jim, who is going to introduce the session. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Roundtable panel on rebuilding the network. We're very excited to have all of you here. I'm your moderator, Jim Barlow. I work in the Amadeus airline strategy team. I think we're all familiar with the basic contours of the problem caused by COVID and rebuilding the network. Passengers no longer feel safe to fly. Demand has gone way down. As a result, airlines have pulled back their schedule dramatically and have put in some pretty crazy low fares to try and entice people to come back. Government has issued lots of new restrictions about where and when and how to fly. And this question of rebuilding the network is really an incredible exercise in judgment on behalf of airlines now. How and when and where do they reinstate capacity? How do they find new price points that are sustainable, that passengers are going to want to buy? It's a very difficult problem, and they're asked to do this with no historical data, no relevant historical data that they can use. And their traditional ways of building the schedule and determining price points just don't apply. Lots more uncertainty with their competitors and what customers want. And also they're doing this perhaps with less staff. With some cost control measures, there may be less people able to do this. So this is not the world we really want to live in, but I'm afraid is the world that we do live in. And finding ways through this situation has become critical really for every airline in the world. With me to talk about the challenges caused by the network in this situation, and then some approaches to getting through it, is a very distinguished and exciting panel that we've got here. So 4 airline members from leading airlines here to talk about. I'd like to introduce Robert Carey, Chief Commercial Officer of EasyJet, Nicholas Salazar, Vice President of Network Planning and Scheduling at LATAM Airlines. Also, Matt Muehlheisen, a Senior Director at the Network Planning at Southwest Airlines. Kevin Gerb, Vice President of Pricing and Revenue Management at Alaska Airlines. And 2 technologists from Amadeus, Tomas Fig, a leading figure in revenue management, the Amadeus Chief Scientist, and Renzo Vicari, the Senior VP of the Amadeus Sky Suite, which is a new and innovative leading network planning suite. So thank all of you guys for joining us. Let's first, before we begin the discussion, if anyone in the audience, any attendees would like to ask us questions, please do so via the Q&A feature, and we'll try and get to them through the discussion as best we can. So with that, let me start with Robert, and Robert, ask you, your team, you and your team at EasyJet, what are some of the approaches that you're taking to address the challenges to rebuild the network?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim, and afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as you've shared a little bit in the context, I think this has been a really extraordinary time. Obviously, over the last 6 months, it's only been, it's hard to see. I think with the team, what we've had to do is really tear down. I mean, we had processes in place, fairly standard processes, and we put in place tools around that process to allow us to build optimally. But with the arrival of COVID, we really had to rethink most of those processes and rebuild our schedules from scratch on really fast timelines. So we rebuilt the processes and had to put in place, how do we take a schedule from essentially 0 build baseline all the way to on sale full schedule within a 2-3 week time period. And doing that, we've been doing that basically every month, 2 weeks to every month throughout the course of the summer, as we've been reacting to not only the uptick in demand, but then also the, as new restrictions come in place and we have to react to that, seeing where the changing patterns of customers are. And that's been a real focus, not only on getting the ways of working right between the team. So what are the forecasting methods we're using to feed in? And so we really had to bring together different areas to do that. So for example, our revenue management team is working very closely with the network team now and trying to forecast that demand, because we are on such a short window of what we're looking at and how can we think about the forward demand, all the way down then from the network team and the scheduling team working even much closer together than historically, as they try to make the trade-offs to get the right balance of what do we want to fly in the most efficient ways to do it. But really, redesign that process from scratch, getting everyone working together, and then also getting the tools in place to support our team and be able to produce on those quick timelines.
Terrific. Let me turn to you, Nicholas, and let's follow up on some of what Robert said. And Nicholas, I've heard you use the words, your team thinking differently. Robert also mentioned the sense of building schedules from scratch. And I'm interested in any commonalities that the experience at LATAM Airlines that you have with what Robert has described, or maybe perhaps anything new. So could you kind of add on to what Robert said, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, Jim. No, like you mentioned, it's a completely changed world. And for us who are trying to design networks, not only is history not telling of anything, so we're looking at new data sources and new demand to forecast demand, looking at which is, I think, valuable and will be something that we will retain for the future, but we search for new data sources to kind of give in leading indicators of demand. And with that, we have to change our schedules completely. Like Robert said, markets are behaving differently. Different markets are recovering at different paces. Business is slower, leisure is faster, VFR in some instances is growing faster. And on the other end, we have border closures, government restrictions, quarantines, and all sorts of creative restrictions to get people or to kind of contain the virus spread. So with all those variables, such as just like the main data is not really useful, our historic schedules as a base are not useful. So we have to kind of put all these variables together and try to build, like Robert said, clean sheet schedules from scratch, and trying to redesign in very short periods of time connectivity banks in their main hubs, make sure that we're serving the markets that we can, and to react very fast, because we can make mistakes, and we usually do, and we have, but then if we are able to learn from those mistakes quickly, we can take some opportunities. So we are really, I would say, on a more short-term schedule building timeline, using, thankfully, we've been implementing some tools for the past few years that are helping us in the process. In particular, I mean, I think we're finishing up the SkyMax implementation, which is really helping us with building these schedules. And I think I think this is key, and it's not going to be key right now only, but it's going to be key into the future as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Nicholas. Let me turn to Matt, because some of what Nicholas said I thought was fascinating. Again, this of let's just accept that the traditional way of scheduling doesn't work anymore. Starting with scheduling and producing a new schedule, same season last year, that might have been the old starting point. That no longer works. Both Robert and Nicholas have used the expression clean sheet scheduling. So starting the scheduling assumptions, on the kind of zero assumptions, no basis. Let the new route economics dictate how you build the schedule. Matt, I think it's fair to say, from what I know of you and your team, you've been thinking along these lines anyway. So could you share some of your experiences with clean sheet scheduling, and specifically how it applies here, please?
Yeah, of course, Jim. Thanks. So it's funny what Nicholas and Robert were saying is all that is absolutely true. It's in a weird way, and a lot of network planners will understand this. This is what we live for: is this ability to solve problems and change and adapt. You just don't hope that it's in this manner when your airline and everybody else is at stake. But these are the these are the times that we innovate. These are the times that we develop what we do. And looking back on just my history at Southwest, we've had these experiences in the past after September 11th, after the Katrina hurricane that affected New Orleans in the United States. those were instances where we learned from and we developed, and we started realizing a long time ago, because of some of these, that we needed a different set of tools, and we needed what they're calling clean sheet optimization, which is where we're now developing a schedule from scratch every time we want to recreate a new base schedule. So we started partnering almost 7 years ago, I believe, with a company called Optum to work on building a clean sheet optimizer for us. This was actually our third optimizer we built. And now that company is part of Amadeus, and the tool is SkyMax, like Nicholas talked about. So we've had this tool in place for quite a while to do this. It just wasn't intended to go this far. Who would have thought a year ago that the max grounding would only be a small piece of what the problems to come would be for our airline especially, but for network planning as well. So we started developing some other tools around the max grounding to help us react and what we call adapt to changing environments. And this just kind of blew up that scenario of the max grounding to a whole new level that we never thought we'd experience, and obviously hope we never experience again. But I think to take the positive out of it, it's I think a lot of airlines and a lot of folks in network planning are adapting like everybody talked about, and changing the way we're doing things. We will come out stronger because of it. That we will have better tools, we will have better thoughts, we'll have better data, and we won't be afraid to change, like I think a lot of network planning has been in the past.
Thanks, Matt. And one of the things that you mentioned, Matt, and I think Robert and Nicholas as well, was data. And we talked about before about the lack of good historical data, but you need to start with something. So let me turn to Renzo. Renzo, I'm interested in your thoughts on when you do clean sheet scheduling, when you build a whole new schedule from scratch for a season, you need to start with some kind of assumptions about demand. What is available? What is possible to be able to do that? What are your thoughts, please?
Hi, Jim. Hi, everyone. So I think that there's a couple of things in play here. So when you talk about the clean sheet optimizer, necessitated by the fact that demand has changed so much, and so the old way of doing things just doesn't work. So that's the bad news. The good news, though, is that the fundamentals of airline route economics, airline scheduling haven't changed. So matching capacity with demand, subject to all of your operational constraints like block times, turn times, and connection times, those fundamentals haven't changed. And the actual values might have changed, but the fundamentals haven't changed. So when we talk about clean sheet scheduling, let's first talk a little bit about how it works, Jim, and then I'll talk about the data, the data needed. But how it works, it's the same process from before. It's just that this process is now automated. So now you have new algorithms, new technology, searching through all of the possible combinations. You still need to give it some inputs. So some of the key inputs for clean sheet scheduling, the clean sheet optimizer, are you start with a frequency plan. So you do not have to start with a previous schedule. You just provide a frequency plan. You provide demand. You provide constraints, and then the optimizer will kind of search through all of the possible combinations to build the best possible schedule, which is maximizing revenue, same as before, subject to all of the operational constraints, same as before. So that part doesn't change. And now to your specific question, Jim, about the data, then just as data was important before, it's even more important now. And yes, while it is true that historical market sizes are probably not relevant, anymore. Historical MIDT data from last year isn't relevant anymore. But if you're creative, airlines have massive amounts of data they can use to run these models. There is search, data, shopping data, in terms of what people are looking at now, and then there's also short-term revenue management data. That can be used as the best point estimate of demand at this point.
Great, thanks. Robert, I think you wanted to add on to that, please.
Yeah, just building on that a little bit, I think, Renzo brought up a great point that, one of the upsides that at least we've been experimenting with and seeing, some results from is normally, as right, the build cycle, especially if you're in a heavily slot constrained environment, it follows a fairly rigorous pattern that you have to start out before. So I can remember coming in, and early on we talk about a new market, and it, be sometimes 12 months from when we started looking at a new market to when we're actually adding in the new market. One of the interesting things we found with COVID is, especially with the shorter booking windows that we're dealing with on everything, we can actually play with new types of data sets that historically, more like probably a consumer or retail company would think about using some of those data sets, a little bit like Renzo said on the revenue management data, where we can test some things and put them in faster because, we're going to be launching the flight in 30 to 45 days from when we're putting it in. So that search data or that trend data or whatever data we're pulling in, we've played with a few different sources, can actually help, we can actually move faster into essentially bringing that product to life and bringing it to market, where historically, yeah, I could look at the search data, but if I'm 12 months from putting a flight in the market, maybe it's not the most relevant trend, a year from now. That's been really exciting to see, actually.
Yeah, that's great. The necessity being the mother of invention. And, the situation that we're in, we need to be creative with finding new ways of doing business. Let me now turn to, once we reinsert capacity and have built a schedule from scratch, we need to find good price points, and we need to find ways of doing good pricing and revenue management. So let me turn to you, Kevin, now. What are your and Alaska's experiences with trying to do good pricing and revenue management during this period?
Great, thanks, Jim, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. And yeah, as everyone has said, the world has really changed pretty dramatically. The traditional revenue management opportunity during this time is just so much less. Managing inventory, there's not that much opportunity. So we've shifted to number one, getting very focused around and reactive to the demand that is in the market. We've adjusted our reporting so that the revenue management team and the network team are really joined at the hip. So there's daily reports that go out with alerts on where demand is fluctuating. That's the first thing we've done, just to make sure that we've got a good feedback loop cycle. Then the next thing we're doing really is just to focus on the macro level changes in the market environment and customer segments. I think that's the biggest thing to recognize, that number one, business demand has gone down, so we need to adjust our close-in pricing. The leisure segment just won't pay those normal premiums. We're also reacting to the market uncertainty. Guests need more flexibility, so the industry has moved on change fees, but we're also focusing a lot more on pre-purchase opportunities. I think that's a big area of opportunity for the industry, and we've seen quite a bit of movement there. And then focusing on a more regimented program around market stimulation. So we've actually brought in a third party to help us with a much more structured approach to promotions, to which segments and the timing around that. That's really helped us to start to spur demand recovery. And then the last kind of area of opportunity, I would say, is the focus around getting better data to improve forecasting. So that's one thing that we're able to do via our RM vendor, having a better learning model. That's something that we're working on. And then probably the biggest short-term opportunity is to use search data, web search data, to give us more granular view into where demand is shifting. I think that's probably one of the biggest biggest opportunities and focus areas for us.
Kevin, one of the questions that have been submitted was about search data. So could you say a few more words about what kind of data we're talking about and specifically how you're using it, please?
Well, there's two different sources. You can use your internal .com search data for your direct channel, and then actually Google has got a kind of a suite of products or kind of data cuts that can provide some very granular information around customer, around geography. There's quite a bit of robust information around that you can really build some pseudo demand profiles that you can feed proxies into your revenue management process, not necessarily into your system, but your revenue management process on where you react, where you don't react. So that's been extremely helpful.
Great, thanks. Thomas, let me turn to you. You've given a lot of thought on how to adapt pricing revenue management technology given this situation. Please tell us all some of your thoughts about how some of the technology can be adapted in the new world that we're living in, please.
Yes, hello everyone. I mean, it's a real challenge from an RM perspective that basically the historic database has become obsolete. So we essentially had to come up with a method that were able to learn faster. And typically in an RM application like revenue management, you have 1 year of history in order to be able to estimate seasonality. And if you try to use less data, for example, the recent data, it will be more adaptive, but it at the same time introduce noise because you are estimating using less data. So this was really the problem, to say, how do you balance stability and adaptability? And the way we sought to do this was to say, split the forecast model into 2 parts. Those components that are resilient to the pandemic and those that are more volatile. And the stability will be retained because of the parameters, and not all the parameters on recent data. So what we do is to use the recent sales data.
Did we lose Thomas?
Thomas, you're on mute.
I think Thomas.
Can you hear me now? I'm here again.
Yeah.
I think I fell out. So what we do is to use the recent sales data. So what kind of bookings the airline.
Thomas, I think you drifted out again.
I think Thomas is messing with us.
Yes. Why don't we move on then? There's a couple of
the latest observations. And in this way, we have been able to obtain stability and adaptability.
Very good, thanks. Again, that's interesting, Thomas, that still, even with the data issues, there are some things that we can do to learn from what's there and use that in our decision making. I'd now like to turn to some of the questions that have been submitted and ask Robert and Nicholas, as well as Matt, about their experiences with rebuilding the schedule in light of connections. So 3 very similar questions had to do with, is it much more difficult to rebuild the schedule when you're worrying about connections? And the experience, say, with EasyJet, primarily more of a point-to-point airline, versus LATAM network connectivity airline in Santiago versus Southwest. So maybe if I could start with you, Robert, to what extent, if any, do connections play into your attempt to reinstate your capacity?
Yeah, no, I'll probably be among the simpler answers on this one, which is, as a point-to-point carrier, basically none. So I think, we found over time that we do a bit of connectivity with our worldwide product, but it's with pretty long connection times. And we found that for the bulk of our customer set, we're really just trying to focus on the point-to-point market. So we focus much more on getting the right product in there for the customers who want to go nonstop. So I don't know, Nicola, Matt, maybe you want to give a bit the other side of the view.
Sure. I don't know who, Matt, do you want to go first or?
Oh, go ahead, Nico.
Okay. Now, like we have a very we participate in a lot of markets here in South America, so I'm going to give the I don't know, the consultant answer, which is depends. It depends, because we do have some markets where connectivity is key, and given the demand scenario today, we're trying to get as much demand as possible into the flights, and when you look at the large you have the large point-to-point markets, of course, which can sustain frequencies on their own. But in general, we serve a lot of smaller cities, and that they require connectivity because you have to concentrate a lot of traffic. So in some parts of our network, we've had and we've tried things, and this is part of what I mentioned earlier, that we've had to experiment. So at one point, you could design just focusing on the point-to-point, but then you realized you needed to concentrate more demand, and you started to bank some airports. But you have to build hubs from kind of scratch as well, because you have less frequencies. In the past, you could fly 10 frequencies a day to a particular destination, so you could pretty much make sure that some of those frequencies connected to the other. Now you have to actually focus it and concentrate it. So we have been putting a lot of emphasis on connectivity on certain parts of our network. And on others, which usually depended on connectivity, we haven't been able to actually do that. We've had to focus more on how do we do point-to-point, or actually work with our partners. Just as a sense, on some long-haul flights, most of our regional feed has been closed because of border closures. So we've had to go most on the local market, but then connecting beyond other hubs. So we've kind of restructured our hub logics. So I would say connectivity for us still plays a big part, and in some markets is actually very more relevant than before.
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you, Nicholas. Matt?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that too. So we're in the same position. So Southwest has always been known as a point-to-point carrier. However, we have a lot of cities, more than double digits, that are over 100 flights a day. So we offered a lot of connectivity as well. But what we noticed was, so when the pandemic happened, we started pulling down flights. What we started experiencing, or what we needed to retain revenue. And you had to pull down flights, but you wanted to retain revenue. So the best way to do that is make sure you have good connectivity, so that you still offer options for those folks who may have been booked on a nonstop to get the connectivity. So what we ended up doing is basically building a hub and spoke in May and June, so that you could really connect passengers better. So connectivity's become a bigger portion during this piece, because you just can't fly all the point-to-point nonstop that you want to fly, because there's just not the demand there. I think there was another question in there about, is it easier to manage a point-to-point network versus a hub and spoke? And I would say it's absolutely not easier to manage, but there's differences in both of the schedules. So a hub and spoke has a lot of very thin routes feeding the hub that they just can't manage right now. We had more point-to-points that are thin that we can't manage, but we can feed that over a hub and spoke. So both problems are absolutely different. But that's what we've run into at Southwest, is we've had to end up building a much more connecting base structure than we've ever had before, just to ensure we try to get as much revenue as possible. Because I think, as Kevin mentioned and Tomas, demand is almost fixed at this point. People are either going to fly or they're not going to fly. It's very difficult to stimulate. So what you're trying to do is just bring on as much revenue, or hold as much revenue as you can, and give yourself the opportunity to carry a customer if they want to go.
Great, thanks, Matt. Let me shift gears a bit here. I'm interested in the airline panelist view of the mindset of their team, during this period. So what sort of new processes or ways of thinking are you trying to instill? I've heard some of you say, being somewhat agile, nimble, sense of experimentation, trying something. If it doesn't work, then let's try something else. Perhaps even more tolerant of failure, because again, that's the world that we're living in. Maybe Robert, I start with you, but I'm interested in everyone's view of what sort of mindset changes are you trying to instill in your team to help get through these difficulties?
Yeah, no, happy to kind of kick this one off. I'm sure we'll all have some good war stories in addition, but you know, I think, look, obviously, I think early on, some of the stuff we put in place, you know, one, as you highlighted a little bit, Jim, we went to kind of a cross-functional approach very early on. We called it the command center, and basically brought together our revenue network and sales teams all into one consolidated team, just because we needed to move with a much faster pace. And found that could get a lot better cross collaboration going faster. You know, we've now, as we've kind of grown back the network and tried to standardize. I mean, we're now in what, month 7 of dealing with this or something like that. You know, we've had to shift a little bit from what was a very early on firefighting mode to much more now of dealing with, you know, it's still very variable, obviously, and there's a lot of shifting going on, but we've had to kind of systematize a little bit of it to make it a bit sustainable for everyone, because we were working at a pretty breakneck pace. So what we've tried to put into the team is, you know, we've created actually inside of our commercial area, cross-functional agile teams, stealing a little bit from the IT playbook here, that are pulling together these different areas on a regular basis to go after specific problems. So that's one. You know, 2, you mentioned the point of failure. We're absolutely embracing that, I think, fully. I think that's the only way you can probably act right now is you know, taking some risks and having some failures. And actually, to the point, you know, when you think about the reviews of the team, et cetera, part of what I've encouraged all my managers to do is really think, you know, have the discussion with team members, you know, what did you fail, but more importantly, what did you learn out of that as a core of this, and what are you going to change going forward, and implement that as part of the review process as well. You know, maybe the third one I'd just call out as well. The other thing we've tried to do is put it gives some bounds on the speed at which we need to work, but put it in reality. And what we did by that was a little bit set you know, we're kind of saying for now, no project should really be taking to get to an output longer than 90 days. And it's not a question that there's not bigger questions we could go after. There's fundamentally, you know, a ton of bigger questions, but in the world we're in, spending that kind of large chunk of time on a project right now when the world changes so fast just doesn't make sense. And we're really focused on, let's drive to projects we can see getting to, you know, get it to market faster and iterate it as you go, as opposed to trying to get the perfect answer in an unpredictable world. I'd say those are probably 3 I'd call out from our team as kind of core.
Fantastic. Kevin, let me turn to you, because you mentioned network planning people and revenue management pricing people working together as well. So maybe you could expand on this as well, the sort of the mindset that you're trying to instill at Alaska to get through this. What have been your experiences?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just to set up more structure to guide the communications and understand, like, what are the trigger points that you want to react to. So as I mentioned, we've got, you know, daily reports that come out that the 2 teams have kind of coordinated around, saying once we reach this level of threshold of demand in a market, it will trigger a review process, and that will, you know, go into the network planning, you know, process. So I think it's bringing the teams really close together so that there's at least, you know, daily communication, but it's really constant communication. But it's really having a joint set of thresholds where there's going to be a certain reaction in the market. So it's more structuralizing that communication, given how fast things are changing.
Great. Nicholas, how about you? I've heard you use the word think differently, and I presume by that you mean somewhat a mindset change or culture change. What is your experience at LATAM Airlines been?
Yeah, so same as Robert, we and Kevin, we've had a lot more closer coordination between the commercial teams. So RM and network and sales to a certain extent, working in Zoom, let's say meeting rooms, because we're all virtual. But working together, and we've had to push down decisions to a lower level to make sure that they are made faster. You know, in the past, like we also operate in slot constrained environments, so you had a season plan and you had time to kind of ask for the slots, get them back, adjust, make sure you put the projects in. And today we're working in closer AP windows and shorter scheduling windows, and having to make a lot of adjustments on the way. So having teams make quicker decisions is important, which will, as I mentioned, open up potential mistakes, and we have to manage that and kind of change the mindset, because at least in the time we always had people concerned about making mistakes, or always getting not tolerating the frustration, and frustration is a very important part of what's going on today. I mean, there's you start seeing demand on one route, and then the next day the border closes and demand plummets, and it's of course not the analyst's fault, but you have to deal with that. So kind of accompanying the teams that are taking decisions, that are looking at the markets, looking at the flights, RM with network, making decisions on a short AP, and getting these teams to run together has been very valuable, and I think it's also something that will stick around in some form into the future.
Great. Matt, tell us about Southwest and the mindset change that's occurring there, if there is one.
Yeah, I think it goes along with what all three of the guys have said, that you're reacting a lot more than you've ever. The thought of long-term planning is kind of funny at the moment, and so that's what network planning has always done, is long-term planning and strategy. So the fact that you're really more inside this 90-day window, and you're changing schedules that are already published, and for us, we're re-optimizing schedules that are published. You're moving customers around that you don't necessarily want to move around, but you have to. All these things are changing on us constantly. As soon as you think you have a plan, you publish your plan and you realize something's changed. And so the adaptability of the team has just been phenomenal. You asked kind of how the environment was, and we've got a few people in the office and we've got a few people at home, but I'll tell you, our teams, and I think this goes for everybody, they work so hard to continue to adapt and recover. In the past, if you had to redo something, people got annoyed, and now everybody's come together, and it's now an opportunity for that collaboration, even inside of network planning, but also across the commercial organizations, like they've mentioned. I think that's the thing that I've noticed the most is just that cohesiveness that we've done, but the adaptability to get through some of these things, and like I said, you publish something, something's changed, the environment's changed, demand's changed. Hawaii has changed. Nicholas mentioned it. Countries have closed borders or extended closures, and now you're adapting again. So just the constant back and forth until you hit some sort of deadline that says I can no longer touch this anymore. And those deadlines have been pushed in this environment from what we knew prior to. So I think the ability is to just constantly take in new information from wherever it comes from, and rework and rebuild. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to have the right capacity out there, whether it's too high, too low. It's just going to constantly be an era of flux for you. But I think just like everybody else, we're trying to manage as best as we can. We'll hopefully get through all of this, and we'll have some different environment when we come out. And I don't think the network planning will look like it did before. I think you'll have more collaboration, like they said, between the departments. And I think that'll be better for everybody.
Great. I'll now ask each panelist to give some words of advice. So words of advice to other airlines based upon their own experiences about how to meet some of these challenges. And Robert, let me start with you, please. What words of advice would you have based upon what you've said for other airlines going through the same thing?
Yeah, I was worried you're going to call me first to give the words of advice. So I haven't thought through mine yet. But look, I think the words of advice, I've kind of been saying two things to my team throughout, and I'd probably give that to everybody, which is, and I think you heard it quite a bit actually in the way Nicola, Kevin, Matt, probably, and I described a little bit what's going on. I mean, you got to think about this as a family a little bit right now. I mean, if you take a step back for a second and just, keep in mind the kind of, the overall macro environment we're operating in, and you've got a stressful situation at work, and let's be clear, it's equally stressful outside of work. And I think just make sure you have that perspective on everything, so that, we're all supportive of each other. I thought it was a great point, I think both Nicola and Matt mentioned, where we've got people making mistakes, and we got to all be supportive of that. So I think number one advice is, just keep that spirit alive. And the second thing I'd say is, look, I thought Matt, the comment Matt made, it's funny. A lot of my friends outside of airlines and such keep coming to me and saying, it's got to be a great learning environment. And I say, yeah, it's a great learning environment, because there's a little less learning every day, maybe a little bit more stability. But on that, I mean, keep the perspective as well, which is, as Matt said, we're learning a whole lot as we go through this right now. I can guarantee the environment we come out to on the other side is going to be different than what we came in on. And let's embrace that a little bit and think about what are all the new opportunities we're getting to go do as a result of that. And, despite all the challenges we're going through, just kind of keep that perspective on. There's a lot of exciting things I think we're doing as an industry right now that'll be great afterwards.
Great, thanks. Nicholas, let me turn to you, and in the interest of time, if I could get your 30-second version, please.
You're on mute, Nico.
I practiced this and I made a mistake. So I'm just kidding. No, a 30-second advice I would say is like Robert said, the world is going to be different when we come out of this, and the industry is going to be different. The markets are going to be different, and I would say embrace technology, embrace change, and if you manage to do a correct process of embracing this change and putting technology in place and putting the right processes, I think the opportunities that will become available will materialize. I think that was 29 seconds.
You're here. Well done. As schedulers, we always end on time. Kevin, let me ask you, what 30 seconds of advice would you have for other people, please?
Yeah, I'll just offer a couple of really tactical, solutions. I think addressing the market concerns, as I mentioned, is the first step. More flexible products. There's a couple of variants on that. Fine-tuning the promotional planning process. I think that needs to be more targeted in this world. Focusing on alternate data sources for kind of planning and for forecasting purposes, and as I mentioned, search is key there. I think looking at an advanced learning model within your RMS is critical. And then just getting into a testing mindset. It's going to be a lot of trial and error on what works, what doesn't work. So just getting very structured about that's going to be key.
Great. And Matt, your words of advice, please.
Yeah, I think it goes along with what they've all said. So the first one would be change. Don't be scared of change. Change is inevitable at this point, I think, as you've all realized. But I think we were slow to make changes, and these things are enable you to do that faster. Don't be afraid of mistakes. The second one goes along with what Kevin says. Don't be afraid to invest in the areas that will benefit you down the line. We invested 7-8 years ago in optimization. We've been on this path with the Sky Suite to develop a new forecaster and simulator planning tools along with our along with our optimizer, and that suite of tools has not only saved us a lot, but it's also allowed us to adapt a lot to the changing environment. And so I know those are scary propositions, but they're things that have really led us to down this path and allowed us to be successful right now.
Thanks, Matt. And I'm afraid Renzo and Tomas, we're about out of time. Amadeus does blog posts, and I think I'll ask both of you to give some of your words of advice via our blog posts. With that, guys, I think we'll close the session. To summarize what I heard today from our panelists, was this sense of energy and experimentation. Don't be afraid to embrace some change. Technically, when rebuilding the schedule, start from scratch, and having the data and the technology and the people to do that is important. We heard from Kevin and Tomas about how to reinsert and try new price points. But this sense of a mindset change, I think, is particularly important, and relying on the quality of your team to help see you all through. So with that, let me thank our panelists. Really appreciate all of you and your great insight. I thought it was a terrific session, very meaningful. Thanks to all our attendees for listening through this. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. Again, we will record those and attempt to answer them via an Amadeus blog post. And with that, I will say thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day, please.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Amadeus Airline Platform. All great journeys start here.